So while the poll is finishing off, I'm just going to cover the main agenda points for the day, which is we're going to cover the development of state and nature metrics and the development that's been happening with a number of partners around the world. We're going to cover the latest on the piloting plan and the testing of metrics. And then lastly, we're going to cover a Q&A on how you can get involved as well. Now, we'll hear from a range of speakers today. What we encourage is if you'd like to ask questions, do use the Q&A function and pop your questions in throughout the whole presentation. And we'll do our best to answer every and all question as well. And we'll also have about 15 minutes at the end for some extended Q&A where we can continue answering and also maybe spotlight one or two people if there's a possibility for that as well. I'm going to end the poll now, just so you can get a little bit of a sense of where everybody is from. Those are a little bit the results, so you can see, not too surprising, but yeah, quite a bit of interest from the 140 people on the call today. We had about 250 people on the call this morning as well. I'm going to stop sharing that now, and I'm going to move over and introduce Marco Lambertini. Marco is the convener of the Nature Positive Initiative, and he's going to introduce the initiative and the genesis of the development of metrics. Marco, over to you, please.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you, everybody, for joining. We'll move quite quickly on context setting. First of all, by introducing the Nature Positive Initiative. It is an initiative that's actually born in the lead up to the COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity in 2019, as a group of organizations try to advocate for getting a strong biodiversity plan, but also, and particularly, to identify and codify in the convention outcome a global goal for nature, inspired, of course, by the one for climate agreed by the Paris Agreement, something that was uniting the world towards halting and reversing biodiversity loss by the end of the decade, and something that a goal that would be measurable in order to make everybody accountable in delivering that goal. After a successful advocacy effort, of course, not just the Nature Positive Initiative, but many other organizations, governments, business, a huge coalition, as you remember. Of course, the goal was adopted in the mission of the GBF, Global Biodiversity Framework, and using the same wording of the definition of the Nature Positive goal launched in 2020. Halt reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. So at that point, the initiative discussed the next phase, which was obviously focusing on implementation. And so this is the new configuration of the initiative, much more diverse, expanded, including all the environmental international organizations, the largest international organizations, business platforms, standard, target, guidance, setting and guidance providing business corporate organizations, and other organizations like local governance, indigenous knowledge, academia, etc. So very diverse, with three objectives. The first one is to preserve the integrity, the definition of nature positives, too often used a bit lightly, instead of a measurable goal, what it is. And secondly, to align on providing guidance for the implementation of the nature positive goal. These are the main objectives of the coalition. Next slide, Gavin. So just a reminder, I'm sure you don't need this, but just in case, nature positive goal is the objective and the mission of the Global Biodiversity Framework, is defined as halt and reverse nature loss, biodiversity loss by 2030 on a 2020 baseline. And once this was adopted by the GBF, of course, there was a lot of excitement, but also at the same time, there was an obvious issue. And the issue is that being defined as a measurable goal, we didn't actually have the time to agree on, build consensus on how to measure it. And this is exactly the process that we have embarked during the last 9 months around building consensus on a minimum set of practical but meaningful nature metrics, state of nature metrics. And if you go to the next slide, I'm going to highlight the importance of taking a more realistic picture in terms of holistic view in terms of looking at how to measure nature in order to deliver a nature positive goal. You're familiar with the state pressure response framework, I'm sure, but just to highlight that is super important. All these categories of metrics are super important. Pressure and responses obviously are the entry point, if you like, for many corporate players in particular to assess their pressures, respond to it, and aim to deliver nature positive outcomes. But until we also find a way, a particularly comparable way, and an agreed standardized way to measure the state of nature, it's going to be very difficult to inform nature positive strategies so that the response to pressure is adequate and is adequate to deliver a nature positive biodiversity outcome. So this is the reason why we actually focus particularly on the state of nature metrics. This is one of the major gaps, while a lot of work has been done on pressures and response. And that's why we have started this consensus building exercise that engage a lot of organizations and led to a first draft framework they were now going to pilot. But the idea, and the next and last slide, I think for my part, Gavin, the idea is that we will build a consensus in order to agree and define a set of metrics that are universally applicable, that will encourage companies that many of them are quite confused by the complexity of the biodiversity space, by the large number of metrics available today, and by sometimes also the lack of practicality of some of these metrics. Create a confidence that actually we're using a minimum but meaningful set of practical metrics, they could start the journey towards delivering nature positive outcome, developing nature positive strategies. So that's the main purpose of building this consensus. And the aspiration is that at the end of piloting these metrics, confirming that these metrics are actually applicable, usable, affordable, practical, but also meaningful in assessing state of nature, will end up in a number of frameworks, whether standards or target settings, voluntary or potentially also regulated frameworks in future, so that we are all measuring the state of nature outcomes in a comparable way. So that's the context, that's the purpose of the initiative. And now, Gavin, back to you to talk about the outcome so far.
Great, thanks so much, Marco. And to build on that point, Marco's last point there, in order to test these metrics, the metrics may be able to apply in all sorts of situations and places, but we're putting some real scope around where we will test the metrics. First point to really underline, we have only developed terrestrial metrics so far and developed a consensus around them. We still need to develop marine and freshwater metrics. We'll come back to that at the end of the presentation. For the terrestrial metrics, we think that piloting the most practical place to start is with companies and financial institutions working at a landscape level, but could also be at a company, it could also be at a value chain or portfolio level as well. And then we also think that testing through the lens of disclosure frameworks, potentially compliance, target setting and tracking, and corporate nature positive strategies are all useful places to start. Now, these may or may not be the only use cases, but the real purpose right now is to test whether these metrics work practically. And so that's why we're being a little bit more focused in this testing and piloting phase in 2025. Now, in order to get there, and in order for the metrics to be kind of widely accepted, this is not just a technical exercise, it's really a consensus building exercise as well. So we've been engaging over the past few months, starting with our 27 core partners that were introduced at the start of the call, looking at the landscape of available metrics and methodologies and underlying data sets that are out there, refining them down a heavy public consultation phase, where we got an awful lot of written input, more than 130 kinds of written input, as well as input in workshops and sessions during and around COP16 in Australia at the Nature Positive Summit. And that led to essentially a set of metrics that have now been become ready for testing. The feedback we got was also from a lot of different sectors, which we're really happy to see as well, and which also reflects the key tension in developing something like this, which is how do you balance kind of high credibility with high practicality as well. We're really interested to see metrics be embodied in different frameworks and guidances and other use cases as well, and also scaled appropriately too. So practicality is key, and that really is the next step to test that. We think we have a good theoretical framework. Does it work in practice? Is it actually operationalizable? Is one of the key questions for this year. I'm now going to hand it over to Emma Marsden. Emma is a technical manager at the initiative, and Emma's going to run you through the actual metrics themselves. Over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Gavin. Good morning, good afternoon. So yeah, I'll give a quick overview of the framework that's been put together. So it starts, and the easiest way to think of it is there's three big buckets. So ecosystem extent, how much nature is there, ecosystem condition, how healthy are the ecosystems, and species, so how healthy is the biodiversity at the species level. And so the framework is built up of a set of universal indicators, which basically just means they apply in all cases or situations. And you'll see we've got ecosystem extent. There's quite there's a little bit of a change to what we published in the public consultation, in that we've defined more clearly the site condition and the landscape condition indicators, and renamed those slightly. So site picks up an area that's more likely to be in a company's direct control, and it looks at structure, function, and composition of the ecosystems, whereas landscape condition looks at a much broader scale and is likely to pick up different factors that come into play at that scale, particularly ecosystem connectivity. And then finally, for species, our universal indicator is species extinction risk. And if we could look at the next slide, please, Gavin. Thank you. Our second set of indicators are what we call case-specific indicators. And these are ones that are only needed in certain situations. And to tell which situations those are, we've got a set that's laid out in the middle row here, the case-specific indicator triggers. So the triggers we've got here are priority ecosystems, the intensive land use biome, and priority species. And each of those three has some quite clear criteria that say that if they are met, or one or more of them are met, then you need to report a case-specific indicator. So for priority ecosystems, we've tried really hard to make sure that we are aligning with existing frameworks and standards, many of which have prioritization systems already. So that includes things like if there's a threat level, if there is a key biodiversity area or high conservation value area criteria met. It also covers ecosystems that are quite common but are suddenly rapidly declining, and it covers ecosystems of local importance as well. The second one was the intensive land use biome, and this is as defined by IUCN's global ecosystem typology. And so this requires specific indicators because those types of habitats are not necessarily managed purely for biodiversity outcomes. So we're trying to measure slightly different things there. And then the final case-specific indicator trigger is priority species. And that's measured in a very, very similar way to the priority ecosystem. So again, looking at threat level, locally important, is it meeting KBA criteria, etc. So hopefully that's clear. What we want to do is dive into the main metrics table. And something that's really important to get across is that this is very much still in draft. Please don't take this as final. As we'll go into in a second, it's going to be revised, refined, and improved throughout the pilot testing that's coming this year. But as you can see, each indicator in the table has one metric associated with it. If it's a case-specific indicator, it has one trigger associated with it, and most of them can be measured at 3 different granularity levels, that fourth column across. So a granularity level You might remember if you were involved in the public consultation, it used to be called maturity level. And we've revised that following feedback to say that whilst the original approach where a company could start measuring at a low or entry level and move up to higher levels over time was seen as very valuable from companies. There's also situations where it might just be the best fit to use a lower or a higher granularity level, depending on the scale of your project or the different purposes. So all we've done now is really reframe the naming to allow more flexibility. And most of the detail has remained exactly the same as what we put out in the public consultation. So that's the overarching draft framework. As I said, the most important bit that we're going into now is really testing it on the ground, which was where we will see what works. And that is the 2025 piloting program. So we are looking to pilot with companies and financial institutions at this phase. So as Gavin described earlier, those are the initial focus use cases. We realize that there's a lot of data providers, service providers, people developing new platforms out there. At the moment, we're currently looking to pilot directly with companies and financial institutions, but if you have that kind of data available, we do have a form on the website where you can register it so that we could reach out in future if there is a need. We're going to be piloting from May through to November, and the key thing to know here is that each company will have a piloting partner from one of the 27 organisations that Marco described at the beginning. And there will be plenty of support for piloting companies. So we're currently working with the Biodiversity Consultancy to develop detailed metric measurement guidance. And we're also working with EY and Ernst & Young on developing an online help desk. There's going to be drop-in sessions, webinars. There'll be lots of community practice meetings to kind of share learnings with peers in the piloting cohort. So very interested to hear from companies who would like to test these metrics. It's, as Marco described, the goal is to embed these in a lot of the core frameworks and standards that companies use on a day-to-day basis. So this is a great opportunity to help shape what those look like in future. Thanks, Gavin. This is just the timeline, as we said. So these metrics are still in draft. The guidance is also still in draft, and the idea is we will iteratively develop those while we gather feedback and work in partnership with those piloting companies throughout the year. There will be an output report at the end of the year, and then from 2026 onwards, we'll look at embedding these in frameworks and standards. And just finally on how you can get involved. As we said, the most important thing is to partner with an MPI member who will support your journey. Within the information that we'll ask, we'll look for the location that you're planning to test the metrics in, and this doesn't need to be the full operations. It could be a handful of sites where you'd like to give this a try. We'll ask about the focus use case that you are looking to test it in. So this could be some strategy work you're doing, target setting, project or initiative monitoring, or you could be using a particular disclosure framework. And we'll hear from some of those shortly as well. You can also look at where in the value chain you'd like to look, where you'd like to test the metrics. And then we are particularly looking to hear from companies in the agricultural or transportation or real estate and construction sectors where we've got some gaps at the moment. And similarly, companies or projects located in Africa and Asia. Thanks, Gavin. On that, I'll hand back to you, Gavin, and we'll hear from some of the partners who are getting involved in this piloting.
Great. Thanks so much, Emma, and to Marco as well for sketching out the journey so far and the piloting will be undertaking this year. So I'd like to introduce three speakers now, one by one, and also to stress and underline this is about building metrics where we build a wide community consensus. So not a new product on the market to compete with many others, but a common approach. And that's why it's really important to work in partnership with many of the main actors in this space. And on that note, I'd first like to introduce Angela Graham-Brown from the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. She's the Director for Nature Action at WBCSD. Over to you, Angela, please.
Thank you, Gavin, and hello, everyone. It's nice to be with you to say a few words about how WBCSD's work connects to the work of the Nature Positive Initiative. Before that, I just wanted to introduce WBCSD, which is a business association of about 260 multinationals that work together on sustainable development. We are not a standard setter per se, but we contribute the business voice into the development of standards and frameworks. And metrics are really important to us. If you can move on to the next slide. It's a big area of focus in our nature program because our members have expressed being confused about the number of nature-related metrics that are currently being promoted. And this is stifling progress on nature, on their capacity to set targets and take action on nature. We see metrics as a really, cornerstone of a well-functioning corporate accountability system. It really gives that confidence to corporations to set targets, knowing how they will be able to measure their progress against the target. But it's also a filter to be able to get the right data that is needed to be able to really inform decision-making and resource allocation. And so if you move on to the next slide, for the last 3 years, we've been working under the umbrella of our, what we call roadmaps to nature positive, to work sector by sector in identifying key impacts dependencies for the sector, and then what are the priority nature-related metrics to focus on. And all this is going to be brought together into a portal by the end of this year that is really meant to be a tool to help sustainability practitioners navigate the space, the voluntary and regulatory framework that exists out there, and the metrics the nature-related metrics that are being promoted. And so if you move to the next slide, so the initiative that we have going on at the moment is it's really aimed, it's not aimed actually at seeking to introduce a new set of metrics. We don't need that, and we all agree on that. It's not either intended to build consensus. It's rather just a navigation of the existing metrics that are out there. The type of metrics that we're covering are the 3 types: state of nature, pressure, and risk, and you've seen definitions earlier in the presentation. We're taking a very sector-specific approach here. So for each of the 6 sectors that we're working with at the moment, we've brought together leaders of that sector, about 20 to 35 of them, and really, make sure that we work through these metrics, at the sector level. But now we're also starting to work at value chain level, and I'll tell you a bit more what that looks like in a sec. And also our main audience is really business. It's developed by business for business, obviously with input from external stakeholders, but that's really our main target with this work. And so how do we connect into the Nature Positive Initiative pilot testing? So we'll be supporting pilot testing from a few of our members in the forest sector, but more importantly, we have a project that's kicked off last week that is bringing together actors at different stages of the agri-food and forest value chains. They're going to work through an initial set of sustainable forest management and regenerative agriculture metrics and look at their applicability depending on where you are at different stages of the value chain. So, all the way down to the retailer or customer of these products. So there are some state of nature metrics included in the metrics that we're starting with, but there's also other stuff. So also a lot of pressure metrics that we're looking at. So it's really just trying to get a bit of a blueprint of what a differentiated approach to metrics and target setting looks like across the value chain. And and a final word just in terms of how we see the importance of the work of the Nature Positive Initiative. We've been big supporters all year and will continue to be big supporters because of the belief that to be able to really drive these financial flows towards the companies that are doing the best for nature, you need to be able to have that comparability. And that's why the work of the NPI is so important. And that's why we will be taking on the metrics that come out of the NPI process into our portal once they've been adopted by the standard setters. So thank you very much, and I look forward to taking questions in the chat.
Great, thanks so much, Angela. And now we're going to move on to Emily McKenzie, who's the Technical Director for the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure. Over to you, Emily.
Thanks very much, Gavin, and it's a real pleasure to be with you all today. If you could move to the next slide, just a little bit of context. So the TNFD has developed a voluntary framework to help business and financial institutions to assess and report and then act on their dependencies and impacts on nature and how those create risks and opportunities to them as organisations. Since we published our disclosure recommendations and guidance in September in 2023, we're now focused on enabling uptake and action, but also filling remaining technical gaps where market participants have said they need further guidance. And when we did publish our recommendations, about a year and a half ago now, I guess, we identified the lack of consensus on state of nature metrics as one of these critical remaining technical gaps. And that's why the TNFD is delighted to be a member of the MPI stewardship group and to be actively involved in supporting the metrics development and the upcoming pilot testing to make sure that consensus is achieved and they're credible, useful, usable, meaningful, all the many things that Marco emphasised, which are similar to the principles of TNFD. So we're one of the partners leading a small set of pilot tests. We'll be focused on use cases that are most relevant to TNFD, specifically internal assessments of nature-related issues using the LEAP approach that we've developed and reporting against the TNFD's disclosure recommendations. And we may also see if we can get some partners to look at pilots in the context of nature transition plans and target setting in collaboration with SBTN. And then we intend to use those insights to inform possible updates of our guidance and metrics in 2026. So this will be a year of learning to inform updates next year. If you could go to the next slide, just very briefly to emphasise that state of nature is important to our conceptual framework at TNFD. We recognise that dependencies and impacts on nature are sources of risks and opportunities to organisations, and we've incorporated the concept of dependency and impact pathways, which is based on the Natural Capital Protocol. So measurement of the changes in the state of nature matter from an impact perspective. If an organisation wants to understand how, as a result of their business activity, they may be creating a pressure, like pollution or land use change, that's changing the state of nature and that's creating risks and opportunities for the organisation. They'll also care from a dependency perspective to measure changes in the state of nature that might come from their own activities, but also from external drivers to understand how that's affecting costs and benefits to them if their activities depend on nature. So very much at the heart of our conceptual framework. It's also relevant to several of our TNFD disclosure recommendations that ask organisations to disclose their dependencies, impacts, risks and opportunities, the metrics they use to assess and manage them, and the targets and goals they use and their performance against these. So if we go to the next slide, for the LEAP approach, which is our underlying assessment approach, measurement of the state of nature is really integral. Indeed, we already have an annex which has detailed guidance on state of nature measurement, which we hope we can improve through the learnings this year with the MPI. At the moment, our framing includes ecosystem condition and extent and species population size and extinction risk. And then onto the next slide. The final part of TNFD's package is a set of metrics. We've gone through a process to have a small set of disclosure indicators and metrics. Many of them, as you can see here, are focused on those pressures, or as we call them, impact drivers, as leading indicators. But we also have indicators around ecosystem extent, the extent of land, freshwater and ocean use change. And we also have what we call placeholder indicators on ecosystem condition and species extinction risk. And we called these placeholders because we felt there wasn't that consensus yet, but we recognise their importance and encourage organisations to consider and report on them where possible. But again, come full circle, that's why we're so delighted to be part of the process that can create that consensus and resolve the placeholder term. And then just the final point from me is just noting that TNFD is also leading work on a set of data initiatives that we hope will be highly complementary to this work on state of nature measurement. to look at the sources of the data for the MPI metrics, as well as TNFD and SBTN metrics, and testing those against a set of data principles. So that should help us also see where the data is accessible and where there may be a data gap that needs further funding and resourcing. Thank you, Gavin.
Great. Thanks so much, Emily, for that overview and the engagement of TNFD in this as well. Hopefully it answers one or two of the questions that have popped up in the Q&A as well. And also we'll be testing interoperability this year as one of the key topics as well. We've got a number of questions and a number of answers already in the chat, but feel in the Q&A box, but feel free to fire more in as well, and we'll pick any unanswered ones up in the Q&A and give you an overview of what has been answered as well. In the meantime, let's hear now from Elodie Chen. Elodie is a biodiversity lead with the Global Reporting Initiative. Over to you, Elodie.
Yes, and thank you for having me today. And I'm again also very pleased to provide a short overview of how we participate and work with the Nature Positive Initiative. And so the NPI pilot seeks to test and refine the applications of the NPI's proposed state of nature metrics. And as a partner, GRI aims to test these metrics in the context of reporting with the new GRI biodiversity standard, the GRI 101. And our primary objectives for this pilot is to work with GRI community members to assess the compatibility and effectiveness of the state of nature metrics in facilitating reporting under the GRI 101 disclosures, and in particular those listed here. So disclosure 101-7 that covers changes to the state of biodiversity, and disclosure 101-4 on the identification of biodiversity impacts, as well as possibly the disclosure covering the organization's policies to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, as the information on the previous disclosure were directly informed as well. This one. And overall, that would allow us to test as well the practicality and accessibility of these metrics. So as you may know, we released the revised GRI biodiversity standard, the GRI 101, in January of last year in 2024. It has an effective date of the 1st of January 2026. So we're really in the middle of that transition phase where we help also reporters and early reporters in building capacity and getting ready with using the new disclosures, and therefore that NPI pilot is very timely as well. And overall, the disclosures in the new standards allow a comprehensive reporting on an organization, to reporting on an organization's most significant impact on biodiversity and how they manage their impact. And one of the disclosures you'll see on the next slide, disclosure 101-7 in particular, I'll focus on this one for today, covers the reporting of the changes to the state of biodiversity. And to develop the content of this disclosure, we worked closely with the Align initiative that has lapsed since, but also aim to build consensus on how to measure those impacts. So you'll see on the next slides, the work to allow us to inform some of the content, including, looking at organization, ecosystem conditions and extent. So that disclosure focuses really on the impact of an organization's on the type, the size, and condition of ecosystem that are affected or potentially affected by the organization. We also have recommendation to report information on species that are affected or potentially affected, as well as recommendation to report information on supply chain. But yet, going a step further and looking at specific metrics is still challenging, mainly because of what Marco and Emily explained. So there's this lack of global consensus on what are the most appropriate or relevant approaches. And so to that end, we're also looking at the work of the NPI, as we really believe that further guidance will help companies to focus their effort, build capacity in the right direction, and overall drive greater comparability where possible. And maybe as a final comment, our intent, as I explained, is to ensure that alignment between the future NPI recommendation and the GRI disclosure. But we're also very pleased to be part of that concerted effort as it would allow us to also look at the consistency with other frameworks like the TNFD and SBTN, which are also referenced in the GRI 101 and also part of this program.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Elodie. It's great to hear the Global Reporting Initiative perspective, but also TNFDs and also WBCSDs as well. So hopefully that gives you a really good sense of how everyone is working in a very cooperative way from a single consensus starting point to test these metrics in a variety of different use cases. We've heard from standards or guidance and frameworks organizations, mainly on guidance and framework side. And of course, as companies and financial institutions engage with these and potentially other MPI partners as well, then we'll be able to find quite a different variety of tests and approaches that we'll be able to run to see how these metrics will perform. Now, I did mention earlier that these are terrestrial metrics. And so what we have not developed yet are marine and freshwater metrics. We believe that freshwater metrics are slightly challenging, but some iteration and some adaptation to freshwater realms. We should be able to get there this year and build a consensus around those. Marine, we think, is going to be a bit more tricky, particularly once we get beyond coastal zones. And so we'll find opportunities and ways to engage marine specialists in the marine community in 2025, including at UNOC in Nice in the middle of the year on the development of marine metrics as well. Another area where we've acknowledged more work needs to be done is in particular around traditional knowledge. How do we or how does any practitioner working with metrics understand and use and handle with care, but also use and utilize the vast amounts of traditional knowledge that have been built up over millennia by indigenous organizations and groups and individuals, and also local communities as well. So we'll be taking a look at that topic in 2025 too. And then lastly, and if it wasn't clear in the presentation so far, we do discourage companies and financial institutions right now from making broad nature positive claims or specific claims, sorry, around whether a specific company is nature positive or whether a specific site is. There's not a consensus around how you would do that, and there aren't available yet metrics to be able to do that as well. What we will do in 2025 is launch a process of engagement to develop and discuss what claims in different scenarios and situations could look like. This is not an easy question. There won't be any simple answers on it. The simple answer today is you can only contribute to a global nature positive world. You can't go any more granular than that, but we'll explore if it's possible and under what circumstances it may be possible to go slightly more granular, and we'll see where that process leads us as well. And that then, of course, starts cutting across to work that many organizations, companies, and regulators are doing around how companies make claims, how to avoid greenwashing, but also how to gain recognition for the good work and good things that are happening out there as well. So we'll come back to that topic too, separately from the piloting program. Last couple of quick points. If you would like to dig deeper into nature positive and some of the outlines that Marco gave earlier in the session today, there will be a book that's available in May that'll be published. This is a pre-read advanced copy, which I can't quite see with my camera, but there we go. It does exist. And it will be in bookshops and with booksellers in May. So we encourage you to do take a look at that. And then lastly, on events, we will be engaging through the year on events, whether it's the development of some of those new metrics and also to explain progress and to showcase progress on piloting as well. If you have ideas or would like to partner or discuss events with us, do drop us an email to events@naturepositive.org as well.